The Young and the Restless Spoilers Shock. After the devastating news of Heather's death, Daniel had the somber duty of taking her body to the funeral home, where grief began to settle in like an unbearable weight. But for Phyllis, that grief quickly turned to something darker. Anger. Phyllis had always been a woman of action, someone who made decisions with a sharp mind and a strong sense of justice. But this time, her emotions took control, and she found herself consumed by the need to make someone pay. In her mind, one person stood out as the likely culprit: Sharon Newman. Phyllis had no concrete proof, but her instincts told her that Sharon had something to do with Heather's death. Sharon was Heather's former mother-in-law, and despite the family ties, Phyllis had always sensed an underlying tension between them. Heather had been close to Phyllis, almost like a daughter, and the bond they shared made the loss even more devastating. Phyllis couldn't shake the idea that Sharon had a hand in this, especially considering the complicated history between them. The grief-stricken mother-in-law was convinced that Sharon's involvement was more than circumstantial. Without waiting for facts or explanations, Phyllis let her fury take over. She stormed through the doors of Crimson Lights, where Sharon had been quietly sitting, unaware of the storm heading her way. Phyllis didn't pause for a second. Her mind raced with accusations, her heart filled with vengeance as she marched toward Sharon. In a blind rage, Phyllis grabbed her, lashing out with a stinging slap to the face. "How could you?" Phyllis screamed, her voice cracking with emotion. "How could you take Heather away from us?" Sharon, caught completely off guard, stumbled back in shock. She hadn't expected this confrontation, and the venom in Phyllis's words cut deeper than the slap itself. Phyllis continued, yelling accusations that had no grounding in truth, but that didn't matter at the moment. All Phyllis could see was a woman she had long distrusted, and now, in her grief-stricken mind, Sharon was responsible for the unbearable pain that Daniel and Lucy were enduring. Nick, who had been nearby, rushed over to intervene. He placed himself between the two women, his voice steady but strained as he tried to calm the situation. "Phyllis, stop!" Nick demanded, holding his arms out to block her from advancing on Sharon again. "This isn't the way. We don't even know what happened yet." But Phyllis wasn't listening. Her eyes burned with rage, her hands shaking as she pointed at Sharon. "She did this, Nick. I know it," Phyllis cried, her voice dripping with contempt. "She's always been capable of this kind of cruelty." Sharon, her voice shaking, tried to defend herself. "Phyllis, I had nothing to do with this. I didn't hurt Heather." But Phyllis was beyond reason. To her, Sharon's words were empty, lies meant to cover up a horrible truth. Phyllis's grief and anger had clouded her judgment, and she wasn't interested in hearing anything that contradicted her belief. All she wanted was revenge. Nick, torn between protecting Sharon and comforting Phyllis, found himself in an impossible situation. Phyllis was the mother of his child, and despite their complicated history, he understood her pain. But Sharon was his partner, and he couldn't allow Phyllis to continue the assault. He gently grabbed Phyllis by the arms, trying to pull her away. "Phyllis, please. This isn't the answer," Nick said, his voice firm but filled with empathy. "We'll figure this out, but attacking Sharon isn't going to bring Heather back." Phyllis looked at him, her chest heaving with the weight of her emotions. "You don't understand, Nick. Heather was like my daughter. I'm not going to let Sharon get away with this. I swear to you, I'll make sure she pays for what she did." With that, Phyllis stormed out of the cafe, leaving a stunned Sharon and a conflicted Nick in her wake. Sharon, visibly shaken, turned to Nick, tears welling in her eyes. "Nick, what am I supposed to do? People already think I'm guilty. What if Phyllis is right? What if they come after me next?" Nick took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He knew this was a delicate situation. Sharon's past, with all its ups and downs, didn't help her case. People would jump to conclusions, and Phyllis's public outbursts certainly wouldn't do her any favors. "You're not going anywhere, Sharon," Nick assured her, trying to calm her nerves. "We'll figure this out together. You didn't do this, and we'll make sure the truth comes out." But as Sharon listened to Nick's words, a sinking feeling of fear settled in her chest. The body had been found, and now all eyes were on her. She knew that if the police started to investigate, her past would be dug up, and things could spiral out of control quickly. The pressure was mounting, and Sharon couldn't shake the feeling that running might be her only option. Meanwhile, back at the funeral home, Daniel and Lucy were faced with the overwhelming task of preparing for Heather's memorial. The grief was still too fresh for them to even consider thoughts of revenge. For now, they were focused on getting through the painful process of saying goodbye. Guests were beginning to arrive, offering their condolences, and Daniel was barely holding it together. His mind was clouded with sorrow, and every thought of Heather brought fresh tears to his eyes. Lucy, on the other hand, was on the verge of breaking down. She had idolized her mother, and the shock of losing her so suddenly had left her in a fragile state. Daniel knew that Lucy wouldn't be able to handle the truth about how Heather had died, not yet. She was already emotionally shattered, and revealing too much too soon could send her spiraling into a place she might not recover from. But Phyllis wasn't willing to wait. She had made a promise to Daniel, one that she intended to keep. As far as she was concerned, justice had to be served. Sharon would pay for Heather's death, one way or another. However, Phyllis's thirst for revenge could have dire consequences. Sharon was terrified, and with the police now focused on the investigation, she knew it was only a matter of time before they started connecting dots that might not be there. Desperation began to set in. If Sharon didn't leave soon, she could very well find herself behind bars, whether she was guilty or not. With her back against the wall, Sharon had a choice to make: stay and fight the accusations, or run before the walls closed in around her. Either way, the fallout from Heather's death was far from over.